Good afternoon. I held the handrail. Did you notice? Yeah? I didn't get a sweet for holding the handrail, should I? No? I'm here to talk about this very complex subject of behaviour. And what I'm going to talk about really builds, I think, and probably just repeat some of the messages we just heard from Christina. It's a subject I'm very passionate about. Like Christina, I've been working in this business for a number of years, and I remain somewhat perplexed and somewhat challenged by what we continue to do. Why we continue to do the same old things and still scratch our heads and think, well, we're still having incidents. Why is that? And I think we need to move on. Yeah, I think we need to get some deeper thinking around this subject. Let me take you through a little scenario. Just imagine you are going out tonight. Yeah, you're going out with your wife or your husband, your partner, and you're going out for an anniversary meal. This is a 25th or a 20th or whatever. And you're going out to a smart restaurant. The problem is you have just left a meeting, and the meeting has overrun. You are late, and you're driving, and you look at your watch, and you think, this is going to be tight. So what do? Well, like most human beings, you probably take a bit of a risk. You put your foot a bit closer to the floor, and you accelerate. And you may be doing 5–10% over the speed limit. You think, hey, that's okay. That's okay. But unknowing to you, there's a little accident in front, and you get held up a bit further. And now you're even later. The accident clears, and you continue on your journey. You think, I'm going to be really late for this. I'm going to be in trouble. So what do? The 5 or 10% no longer works for you. So what do? You take it to 15%. And occasionally maybe the 20%. And there you are, you're going along the highway, and you think, yeah, maybe I'm just going to about make this. Then you look in your mirror, the rearview mirror. What do you see? What do you think you see? You see a blue flashing light. And very quickly you understand you're going to get done. And all told, the policeman stops you. He comes out, he taps on your window, you ward the window down, and he says, "Good afternoon, sir, madam. I need to have a word with you." And you think, And he says, "Sir, what speed were you doing?" And you say something like, "Well, I was doing about 5 kilometers per hour above the speed limit." He said, "Sir, madam, you were doing more than that." And you acknowledge that. And what are you expecting? You're expecting him to get his book out and give you a ticket and whatever happens. But the next thing that happens is a surprise to you. What he says is, "Sir, madam, it's your lucky day. Today is my birthday. I'm not going to give you a ticket because that would upset me. And I'm going out for a meal tonight. But I am going to tell you, sir, that what you've done is a risk too far." And he asks you, what do you think could happen if you carried on with this behavior? And you say something like, "I might have an accident, I might bump into the car to the front." And he says something like, "Are you aware there are children around here?" And you say, "Yes." He said, "What do you think might happen to them?" And you said, "Well, they might be running in the road and they might run them over." He says, "Yes, exactly right." And so he says, what do you think you ought to do, sir, madam?" And your response is, "I ought to slow down." "Yes, sir, that's exactly what you should do." And the policeman turns around, gets in his car, and off he goes. And you're sitting there, and your adrenaline is pumped, your face is red, you're aware that your heart's pumping, all of those sort of responses that we get in those situations. And you sit and you reflect for a couple of minutes, you start the car up, and off you go. And what speed do? Well, for a time, you're probably going to actually drive within the speed limit. Until when? Until when? For how long? Probably until your adrenaline has actually sort of receded back down to its normal level, you're back in control, you're feeling calm, and you look at your watch and think, anniversary meal. Anniversary meal. So what happens to the right foot? Or is the left foot? I can't mention. Yeah, down it goes again, back up to speed. So the conversation with the policeman has had what effect? Not a lot. What am I describing? I'm describing behavioral safety, am I not? Yeah? Is that right? And I think that's what we've got to challenge. I think, the slide here already says it all. It's time to move on. And one of the key messages that Christina was giving is that that's too simple a solution for a complex problem, and I reiterate that. We've got to get some deeper thinking into this. We've got to move on. If you want your organization and your industry to move on, your thinking has to move on too. If we don't change our thinking, we're just going to get more of the same. More of the same. Okay, let's look at some slides. Yep, that's typically what behavioral safety seems to look like. It's about observing and challenging. It might have a few other bits of frills around the edges, but typically that's what most people, if we surveyed them and said, what is behavioral safety, they would say, it's about observing unsafe acts, it's about challenging people, and it might involve reporting on a report card. Yeah, behavioral safety. And what's that achieved? Well, if you look around all the different businesses that you represent, you've all got some of that. You might call it STOP, you might call it Be Safe, you might call it something else, you might call it this, but fundamentally they're all basically the same. They're built upon the same sort of logic, with the same sort of intention, and with the same problems. How often do you have conversations with people about we're having to set targets for observation cards? Yeah? Does that sound familiar? I bet it does. Okay. And I'm sure, absolutely sure, that these organizations had those sort of approaches and had an emphasis on behavioral safety for many years. And what do we learn? It didn't stop this happening. So what does that tell us? We haven't got it all covered. We're not there yet. There's more to look at. There's more to think about. There's more to do. And why is this unlikely to be the last? Well, we could look at two possible reflections on this. One is, those accidents are always inevitable. We're always going to get things happening like that. It's always going to happen. Yeah? The other thing would be, our approach to understanding and learning lacks the sophistication. We're not understanding this enough yet to be able to deal with it. And I would hope, actually, that we actually are in that box. We need to be open-minded. We need to be research-based. We need to actually think deeper and wider. We need to seek help. We need to look at different ways of actually dealing with all of this. Yeah? And unfortunately, we know that this wasn't the last. You've talked about some of the events today. The slide I typically have here is the Kolskaya event. Who knows about Kolskaya? Hands up, who knows about Kolskaya? That's interesting. 53 people died in December the 13th in an oil-rig problem. And only about 4 people in this room know about that. What's that about? Why don't you know about it? Kolskaya. Happened somewhere near Sakhalin, I think. It was a Russian rig being towed, and it flipped over. And all the crew were on board. How crazy is that? They didn't need to be there, but they were. 53 of them died. Right, the behavioral journey. How far have we got? Then, if this represents at this end the very earliest stages of us on our behavioral journey, and at the other end represents, pretty much towards the end of what we're going to achieve, where do you think we are? Do you think we're there? How many people think we're there on this journey? Hands up. Oh, that's quite reassuring. What about here? Hands up. About 10% of you. What about here? Hands up. That's more of you. I'm surprised at that, but I'm actually gratified. I'm actually reassured, because I'm going to agree with you. Actually, I think that's where we are. We're at a pretty early stage of looking at this problem. There is a lot more. Some of the things Christina has been telling you, fundamentally important to getting this stuff right. And yet we don't see it very much. We don't see it very much. Yeah? Why is that? Because we're seduced by this observe and challenge stuff. We think we've got it covered. We think we're doing the behavioral bit. But we're not. There's lots more to do. This is absolutely central to getting safety right in your business. Take people out of the equation, and you significantly reduce the risk. People are the risk. How people think and what they do is the risk. It's not about your kit. It's not about your machinery. It's your people. Yeah? So we've got a long way to go. So if we've got a long way to go, how are we going to get there? We're not going to get there with our current thinking. We need new thinking. We need new perspectives. We need to challenge what we're currently doing. And what you see from this is these incidents, yeah, they're pretty much the same. It's almost like if you looked at the reports on each of these, someone's taken a word processor and say, find Piper Alpha replaced with Texas City. Find Texas City replaced with Macondo. Yeah? They're pretty much the same. They talk about supervision, they talk about culture, they talk about leadership, they talk about not following procedures. Why aren't we learning? It's the same old stuff. We're not learning because we're not understanding. That's the problem. And it's complex. It's not simple. And yet we're seduced by simple solutions to this. And I'm not going to talk about hindsight bias. Christine's talked about that. This is the ability to see things after the event. Smart-ass thinking is what I call it. It's very easy after the event to say, why didn't they do that? It's bleeding obvious. Well, they didn't have that luxury at the time. They were dealing with the unknown. They didn't know this incident was going to happen. So we really do need to get inside the heads of people who are actually involved in an incident at the time, who are trying to understand it. And that's difficult. That's difficult. Things they did not do type explanations are our favorite ones. They didn't do this, they didn't do that, they didn't do that. That's not taking us very far. We have to think differently. We have to think that these guys were good guys, trying to do a good job. So what did they do wrong? How did they get it wrong? What on earth was going on? Yeah. So we could argue that this explanation on the left is the right one. They got it wrong, how could they have done such things? But we could say instead, we could change the very assumption we have and say, well, actually, those guys were probably just like us. What are we missing at the moment? Because what we know is safety doesn't suddenly go wrong. It's already wrong, it just hasn't led to an incident. So your challenge is finding those things which are already wrong before they actually turn into an incident. And that's the sort of mindfulness that Christina's talking about. Your default position should be, if nothing's going wrong, what are we missing? It shouldn't be, if nothing's going wrong, we're doing a good job. That should not be the default position. We need to turn that on its head and think differently. The risk will always be there. Why? Because it's about people. It's about people. So it's about that one. We like and favor obvious explanations and simple solutions. Again, Christina's talked about that, so I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Why? Why do we like simple solutions? Why do you think? Any ideas? Simple solutions. Why? Because we like to be in control. We like to tick the box and say, yeah, we've understood that, and we fixed it, and we've done it. And we move on. It doesn't mean we got to the solution, it just means we got one. And actually, we look for our solutions not in the wide stratosphere, we look in the solutions in terms of a little box in which we've already got favored explanations, and we pick one out which seems to fit this one. That's what we do. That's what we do. And if you look at behavioral safety, there's a significant trap. What do behavioral safety things observe? They observe things like holding the handrail. Why do we observe things like that? Not because it's critical to safety necessarily, because it's easy to observe. It's an easy thing to look at. And that makes it seductive. And again, it gets us into this sort of situation. We think we're doing the behavioral safety bit. Yeah? We're satisfied that we got this thing under control. Behavioral safety, done. That's not the case. It's not the case. We need to move on. Now, what am I saying? I'm not saying we don't need to deal with the obvious. Holding handrails and things like that are about risk, but my conjecture would be there are very, very few major incidents that have been caused by PPE non-compliance and not holding handrails. Is that true? Yeah. There's other stuff that we need to look at. And this other stuff is much less obvious. And that's the journey that behavioral safety needs to get into. It needs to get into dealing with the much less obvious stuff. Now, look at this issue with holding the handrail. Yeah? What have we got? We've got a sort of an exercise working today trying to get people to hold the handrail. Now, what has that done? One thing it's done is got people holding the handrail and therefore reducing the risk of people falling downstairs. Done that. But what else has it done? Has that turned people onto safety? Does that sort of approach turn people onto safety? Or does it do the opposite? Does it turn people away from safety? In my experience, the conversations I have with many, many people in the oil and gas industries and other industries is a lot of people get turned off by that sort of approach. And what we end up with is a bigger risk than we started with, because we fixed the risk about falling down the stairs, but if we increase the risk because people are not buying into what we want them to achieve. Less obvious stuff. We've got to think deeper and wider. We have to think deeper and wider. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't hold handrails. What I am saying is we need to think much more carefully and sophisticatedly about this problem. Much more. Behavior. We need to establish some fundamental principles. And one of the things we haven't got in any of the businesses that we work with is a real good understanding, a starting place about the assumptions we make and about why people do the things they do. That bit's missing. Why is that? because we like to get into solutions. We like to get into tools. We like to get into doing something. It makes us feel good, particularly in engineering organizations. We are doing type of people. But it doesn't mean that the things that we do actually are based on good sound logic and good understanding. And that's the problem we have. Okay, let's look at some of this. Well, some of this is that, what do we favor? Do we favor that side or this side? Well, actually, we favor this side. We favor the technical solutions. But again, as Christina said, probably a lot of the answers are much more in the sort of psychological aspects. Yeah? But that's not our preferred territory. It's messy. It's difficult to tie down. Yeah? But we need to get better at that. Okay, something a bit different. What would you do with this? You're going to press it. Put your hand up. Who will press this button? Wow. Why are you going to do that? Why? Have you ever thought about that? Yeah, here's something telling you not to do it, and what you want to do, you want to do it. Yeah? Another example. What do you do with that? Why? Explain. I'm a psychologist. I don't understand why you're going to do that. There's a sign here telling you not. Perhaps it's dried out. So what does this tell us? He said, perhaps it's dried out. What does that tell us as a fundamental human principle? We're suspicious, or more than that, we tend not to believe what we're told. Yeah? That's what that tells us. Now think of that as a fundamental principle. We tend not to believe what we're told. That means all this stuff that we do about telling people what they should be doing is not that founded on really, really good understanding of human behavior, is it? How much of the stuff in your organizations is based on telling people in all sorts of creative ways? Yeah? Most of it. Something simple as this tells us maybe we haven't got that right. Yeah? What about this one? Little safety survey for you. Right, you're going to have to look at 3 options here and select one which best describes you. So after you've watched all 3 options, I'm going to ask you, stick your hand up the one that best describes you. Okay? Now don't get too excited by the first one because there's 2 others to follow. So wait until the end. Right, first one. I have sadomasochistic tendencies. I love pain. I enjoy getting hurt. And I get a kick out of inflicting on other people. So in a minute, if that's you, you'll stick your hand up. This is serious. This is serious. 2, I think a bit of pain and mind injury is acceptable. A bit of blood is okay. I think it's really important to do all I can to avoid serious incidents. Or 3, I don't want to get hurt or injured in any way if I can help it, or be responsible for someone else getting hurt. Okay, who's won? This is Denmark. You are boring, aren't you? 2s. I've got a couple of guys at the front here and a lady over there. 3s by default, the rest of you, I guess. So 99% are 3, which is kind of reassuring in terms of what this conference is about and what you're trying to achieve. Right, let's move on from that, because I've got page 2. Okay? 1, I'm a safety liability, make lots of mistakes, take all sorts of risks. I think rules are there to be broken, and I'm not really interested in how other people behave. 2, I'm fairly normal, I make the occasional mistake, can be tempted to take some shortcuts, and may not always challenge unsafe behavior when I see it. Or 3, I'm perfect, never make mistakes, never tempted to take shortcuts, always follow the rules, always challenge unsafe behavior. So, 1s. 2s. 3s. So I'm wrong. Nobody in Denmark's perfect. Yeah? So what's all this mean? There's the answers. What does this mean? What's this telling us? Again, this is about something fundamental about human behavior. Again, something that Christina's touched on. This is about normal human fallibility. We are not perfect. We will never be perfect. The people around you are not perfect. Somebody somewhere today is having a bad day. That's the reality in your business. It may be more than one person who's having a bad day. What does that mean? It means collective mindfulness. It means the default position should be we're missing something today. Something's not quite right. Something's going to catch us. But what we tend to do is we do the opposite. The more we actually have success, the more we have an absence of incidents, the more we tend to think we've got it covered and we relax. Now, don't feel bad about that. That's a normal human being response. We call it complacency, if you like, but it's normal human being behavior. But we've got to think the opposite, because nobody is perfect. Now, it's not wrong to be imperfect. It's normal. So we have to get that into our organizations as well. We have to make people less defensive about this problem. The problem with a simplistic approach to holding handrails is it does the opposite. It does the opposite. So again, we've got to think deeper. We've got to think more sophisticated. So why do we keep getting it wrong? Well, the argument is we need some new perspectives on this. We need to move on. It's time to move on. Behavioral safety has done its job. This is something I come across reading the book, one of the books that Christina mentioned, book by Carl Weick and I can't remember the other second author's name. Safety is a dynamic non-event. What does that mean? Sounds like a real psychologist statement, doesn't it? Safety is a dynamic non-event. Right, I'm going to do a behavioral experiment. This sometimes works, but it may not today, but let's see. Yeah, so you've got to watch me. Now, my question is, which of my hands are you mostly looking at? Is it this one or this one? Who thinks this one? Yeah, this one. Didn't work out well, about 50-50. I would have expected you to say this one. Why? Because psychologically, it's interesting. It's doing something. Our brains, our perceptual systems like to be stimulated. They get bored with nothing happening. This is the stuff that grabs the attention. Now, which one's safety, which one's production, and all that other stuff? Which one's which? Which one's safety? It's this one. This is the boring one. Nothing's happening today. Nothing's going wrong. It's boring. It's all this stuff going on. And actually, this one's doing a lot of this, so we've got more time. We need more time for this one. Where's the time going to come from? It's going to come from here. So we grab the time. Yeah, we grab the time for this one. So what happens to this one? It gets left. Until when? And then we all run over here. Why? Because it needs attending to. What have I just described? A reactive approach to safety. So we talk about this safety being the number one priority and all this other stuff, but really, if we're honest, we're quite reactive. We're quite reactive. How many times do I come across safety tours to an offshore oil rig being cancelled? Just think of that one. Many times. What does that tell me? It tells me there's something more important. Yeah? Time's getting grabbed. So, something to think about. How do we manage that? How do we avoid this problem of people diverting their attention onto all the stuff that's firing off at the one time and letting go of the boring stuff? It's a challenge. And another aspect of this is what I would call behavioral attrition. Who's got children? Yeah, who's got teenage children? How easy is it to manage their behavior? So what do you do in response? You give up. Yeah, you give up. Why do you give up? Because it's difficult keeping it going. It's difficult keeping the standards there. It's difficult maintaining your rules and systems. So you give up. That's behavioral attrition. You get worn down by it. There's other more exciting things to do in life. Safety's the same. We're very, very good at setting standards, but we actually don't manage those standards very highly. And the concept that Katrina talked about, drift into failure, this is at a behavioral level. And this kind of explains why every single incident you come across is about people didn't follow procedures. It's all explained in terms of drift and behavioral attrition. It's hard work maintaining standards. How many of you take shortcuts? Hands up. Not enough hands. Come on, all of you, hands up. All of you. You all take shortcuts in your life. You do. You do. So what's the conclusion to this? Look, no simple answers. Christina said that, I'm saying that. So you can write down two psychologists from different parts of the world say the same thing. Yeah? There is no simple answer to this problem. Therefore, we shouldn't be touting simple solutions. And what falls into that category? Observe and challenge. If you believe that that's going to solve all your behavioral safety issues, then you need to think again. You need to think again. Oh, I moved on. So, if we really do want a step change in actually how we're performing, if we want a step change in terms of the reduction in incidents, if we want to start preventing the major things and also the slips, trips and falls and all of that stuff, we've got to change how we think about this stuff. We've got to change our thinking about human behavior. We've got to think deeper, we've got to think wider, we've got to become more psychologist-like in our businesses. We have to do that. We have to do that. That's the challenge for us moving forward. Not an easy challenge, but a necessary one. Necessary one. And in that, I've probably ended up with just a few suggestions on what that might look like, in terms of our changing thinking. If this is the now, the emphasis on behavior, the emphasis on root cause analysis, hindsight, the emphasis on safety interventions, the emphasis on reduction in incidents, the emphasis on technical rational man, the emphasis on platitudes and fantasy, safety is the number one priority, the emphasis on increasing confidence, then the transition we have to make is more to this side. More holistic and systems thinking. Yeah? Looking at accidents from a much more dynamic and 3D type point of view and foresight. Looking at safer by design, not just safer interventions, but let's actually design safety into the place in the first place. Not just reduction in incidents, let's look at reduction in risk, in behavioral risk. Looking at the sort of social psychology and organizational politics that happen in all organizations. Moving from platitudes and fantasy into real honesty and realism. Challenge yourself. How many of you in this audience actually think deep, deep down that all accidents are preventable? How can you be absolutely sure you're going to walk out of that door tonight and somebody's not going to bump into you? How can you guarantee that? How can you guarantee it? You cannot. So let's get some more honesty and realism into this subject. Moving from increasing confidence into healthy suspicion. Mindfulness. Okay, I've been a bit challenging. Why am I challenging? Because we need to move the debate on. Thank you for listening to me. I wish you all well in your businesses. If you would like to talk to me some more, I'd be delighted to do that. But not tonight, because I've got a plane to catch. And I'm on holiday tomorrow, and I'm not missing going skiing. So thank you very much.